Hi everyone! We are live. I am Sarah Pettis, body positive, intuitive eating coach, and the founder of turnupthelove.ca. And I help serial dieters to reconnect with food, ditch the diet cycle, and come home to their bodies by using the power of self-love. And today we're talking all about triggers, what in the heck they are, and how you can deal with them. So we're also going to be talking about why it's so incredibly important to know what your triggers are if you actually want to heal your relationship with food and your body. And lastly, we're going to be talking about how to deal if you do realize that you have some triggers that are actually preventing you from making peace with food. Okay? So thank you so much for joining. Like I said, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. So if I'm looking at two separate cameras, bear with me. All right. So how I wanted to get started today with sort of a little bit of a pre-party before we get into things, I want you to tell me, do you feel like there is something getting in the way of you making peace with food and reconnecting with your body? Do you feel like you've tried seriously everything, but nothing seems to stick or work long enough for you to notice a change? If so, let me know by typing yes in the comments. Hit me up in the comments with a yes if you feel me what I'm talking about. And I mean, if you are feeling this way, I totally 100% feel you. It's like a wall has been put up, right? And I mean, I totally get this because when I was struggling with food, I felt like no matter how on track I was, even though I was being really consistent and, eating all the right things and getting in all the workouts that I wanted to crush and seeing progress with whatever my goal was at the time, whether it was weight loss or losing inches, I was constantly feeling blocked by something. And I would go back to my old habits, whether that was binge eating or feeling really disconnected from food, or eating things that wasn't serving me, or being extremely restrictive, and really putting myself back on a diet, whether I realized that or not, right? So I was constantly also living in this state of judgment. How I was thinking and speaking about my body was extremely damaging. It was immensely damaging. And I was constantly wanting to change her. And by her, I really just mean my body, right? I was always wanting to change and just manipulate her in some way, shape, or form. I wasn't trusting her either. I had created so much structure and rules around what I was eating. And I'd feel that if I fell off track, I was going to lose all my self-control. So I had to be very regimented, right? So if you have been feeling this way, don't even worry about it because I've got you covered. Because in today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about triggers and getting to the bottom of why they're maybe stopping you from feeling free with food, okay? And it's seriously, everyone has triggers, every single one of us. I'm not going to be talking so much about triggers in relation to maybe traumatic events, and stuff like that with other aspects of your life, but I am going to be speaking specifically to if you are trying to reconnect with food and eat intuitively, how these triggers could be blocking you from having that connection. Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to also tell you what else I'm going to be breaking down today. So pretty much what in the heck a trigger is, why it's so incredibly important for you to know what your triggers are if you want to heal your relationship with food, and lastly, how to deal with them if you do realize that you have some triggers preventing you from making peace with food. Okay, cool. So let's get into it. So what in the heck is a trigger? To begin with, what in the heck is a trigger? Okay, so a trigger is basically the connection between the conscious mind okay? The conscious mind, the mind at the forefront, which is basically everything that you are aware of, okay? So it's the connection between everything that you're aware of, that conscious mind, and then also a buried painful memory that could be sitting way back in the back of your mind that you may not even realize or remember or think about on a day-to-day basis. But it's a buried painful memory that happened probably a long time ago, okay? So what does that even mean? Well, it means that when something triggers you, you may act out or respond in a certain way because of something that has happened in the past without you even being conscious of that. Okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense? But here's the thing, the conscious mind, it might not necessarily be able to relate it to that buried painful memory, like I said, right? It might not even realize it's happening. So you might find that something's been triggering you without you even realizing why. And you might not even realize that you're being triggered. Maybe you're just acting out in a certain way or doing certain things that aren't really in alignment with the person that you want to be or what you want to accomplish. Okay? So let me give you an example of this to kind of like lay it out a little bit for you. So say, for example, your husband goes out of town for the weekend. Okay, your husband goes out of town for the weekend and you're super bummed because you're like, damn, like I really wanted to spend time with him. And you're like, crap, like what am I going to do all weekend now, right? So you're super bummed about being left alone, okay? So then he leaves. Say you're like, okay, what am I going to do? Say you decide to distract yourself by eating all of the junk food while watching reruns of like The Real Housewives, okay? Say that's how you sort of handle it. AKA, you were triggered by your husband leaving and you decided to eat so that way you wouldn't have to deal with your feelings of loneliness. Okay? Because perhaps loneliness could be a buried painful memory from your past, right? That is causing you to feel a certain way. So you instinctually are just like, okay, well, I want to not deal with that loneliness. So I'm just going to gravitate towards food and distract myself and binge watch Real Housewives, garbage TV, just so you don't have to think about the loneliness. Okay? Does that sort of click for you there? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. So it's basically that conscious mind connecting to a buried painful thought and memory without you even realizing it, okay? And it could all just come down to, using this example, perhaps when you were little, your dad went away on business trips all the time and you're never able to spend time with him. So you'd eat food and watch TV to cope. Okay, so that's just an example there, right? So based on how I described a trigger, who here thinks that they've experienced a trigger? And that's just one example. It could literally be anything. If you think that you've experienced a trigger, hit me up in the comments with an emoji so I know where you're at. So if you've experienced a trigger, hit me up in the comments with an emoji. Be any emoji. So experiencing a trigger is one thing, right? But here's what I want you to know. Here's what I want you to know about triggers. Triggers are extremely important to pay attention to if you want to heal your relationship with food. And here's why. Once you're able to get crystal clear, completely crystal clear on what your triggers are, you'll then be able to catch yourself in the moment or catch yourself in your tracks before you make choices that are feeling out of alignment with what you ultimately want. Okay? So let me say that again. By getting crystal clear and concrete on what your triggers are, You're actually going to catch yourself before you make choices that are feeling out of alignment with what you ultimately want, right? So if you want to heal your relationship with food, you'll want to notice what triggers are causing you to eat in this disconnected way, okay? So let's go back to the example that I just mentioned of your husband going out of town, okay? So say your husband, again, went out of town for the weekend. So if you were aware that your trigger was actually loneliness, maybe you decided that instead of hanging out with an ooey gooey box of cheesy pizza and binge eating on the pizza and watching back-to-back episodes of Real Housewives, maybe instead of doing that, which probably isn't in alignment with how you want to feel in your body, which is probably connected and free and not emotionally driven and fueled by food, maybe instead you decided to call up on your girlfriends and you decided to spend a night with her instead. Okay? So by being aware, you already knew, hey, I don't really like spending time alone when my husband goes out of town. It really triggers something in me. I'm not entirely sure why, but instead of me allowing that to happen, why don't I do something, like figure out an alternative as something to do so that way I don't put myself in this situation. You see what I'm saying? So this is why it's so incredibly important to understand what your triggers are and pinpoint them and get super clear on them so that way you can start to combat these times where you're triggered and then you instantly go and do something that feels safe to you. Okay? So, is this making sense to you? Do you see the importance of how uncovering your triggers can actually really help you to reconnect with food? Hit me in the comments give me a hell yes if you do see this. Give me a hell yes if you do see how this could relate back to your foods and your journey with food and making peace with your body. Now, once you actually know what your triggers are, right? So you know what a trigger is. We know what it is. Now we understand, how that relates to food, but how do you even go about dealing with this to begin with, right? So how do you deal when you realize that your triggers are actually preventing you from making peace with food? What do you do then? Okay? So once you actually realize that you do have some triggers going on, and they're getting in the way of you having this enjoyable and free relationship with food, what do you do next? And I had a question actually come in from my Turn Up the Love Insiders Facebook group from Courtney. And Courtney asked, if you see that a trigger is going on and you kind of catch it in the moment, how do you handle it then, right? And how do you handle it in a way that it doesn't ruin the rest of your day? So really, she wants to know, by being aware, how do you just sort of like pay attention to it without like letting it sabotage you, right? So I'm going to answer on that. And really what this is all about is, okay, so you identify that you have a trigger, right? But before anything else, you have to actually get super concrete and clear on what your trigger is. So maybe you just notice that you're acting out in a way, but if you don't know specifically what it is that's triggering you, you're going to be kind of going back and forth in this guessing work game, right? So you have to get super clear and concrete, like I did in the example of if your husband was going out of town, right? So husband going out of town, loneliness, triggered, makes me binge eat and watch reruns of Housewives. Desperate Housewives, right? So that's like super concrete. It's really getting to the bottom of like what it is that's triggering you, right? So first and foremost, you need to be able to get super clear on what it is that's triggering you, okay? Before you can go anywhere else, because by getting super clear, you're going to prevent and catch yourself before that unwanted behavior is going to happen, like I mentioned, right? So that's the first thing. The next thing is you want to make sure, and this is not always the easiest, but you want to make sure that you're being super kind and loving towards yourself during this time, okay? So without judgment, you want to be aware of what's going on. And the best way that I like to describe this is by basically thinking it as you are just being an investigator. You are being a little detective of your own life, and you're just paying attention as to what is happening. Okay, so you're just being aware. You're not judging yourself. You're not saying, oh, why am I doing that? And what does this have to do with? And why am I still holding on to this? We're not going to play that game. We're just going to say, okay, so what is happening here? Okay, you need to be gentle, because being gentle is just observing versus instantly going into like, I need to fix all of the things, right? And that gentleness will allow you to not allow that to sabotage your day, okay? So once you're kind of in a gentle state and you're just noticing like, oh, like I don't really like how I responded to that, or I don't really like how this feels, I really want you to pay attention to that feeling specifically, okay? Pay attention to that feeling and what's going on inside of you, okay? Pay attention to what you do after the fact, after that's happened, or after you've been feeling that way, okay? Pay attention to how you're thinking. Get really super clear, like this super big magnifying glass on yourself, and just be like, what is up? What is going on? Okay, so what you're feeling, what you're doing afterwards, what you're thinking. Okay, and the best way to, if you want to relate this back to food, and having it to be healthy way of eating with your body, pay attention to what you're doing that feels out of alignment, right? So if you are binge eating on pizza, or you are binge eating on ice cream, or you're using food to self-soothe or to cope, pay attention to what's going on before, during, and after the times that you're eating and you're feeling this disconnection, okay? And that's really important, is to really notice the before, the during, and the after, okay? So pay attention to where you are, what task you are maybe doing, who's around you, if there's people who are watching the news, if there are people who are being really loud, or if you have a family member there and you're eating that in that way, in that disconnected way. Pay attention to those things, okay? Because all of these things are going to give you answers behind the food itself. And they're going to really help you and connect you to the reason why you're feeling stuck. And they're really going to help you to pinpoint and narrow down in on these triggers. So it all comes down to paying attention. Now, with that being said, who here has an idea of like what 1 to 2 of their triggers might be? Share them in the comments if you have an idea of what maybe 1 to 2 of your triggers might be. And you don't have to be very specific right now, but just like gut instinct, like what do you think it is? Do you think it's an emotional trigger, a physical trigger? Can you get a little bit more specific than that? Is it whenever you're around a certain family member? Is it whenever you sit down to watch TV? What are these triggers that you're noticing? When are you eating in a disconnected way? What's happening there? Let me know in the comments if you can uncover what maybe some of your triggers are. And if you are struggling to uncover what your triggers are and you're like, I really have no idea. I've never thought of this. I've never paid attention to this before. And you are, after like listening to this, you're like, oh, Sarah, maybe you're totally onto something. And you really do want to get super clear on what your triggers are and what's actually going on behind the food, and what could be holding you back, so that way you can heal your relationship with food and find freedom with yourself and your body for good, that I'm going to suggest that you grab my free Uncover Your Triggers workbook that I've created, which is really awesome because it really helps you to actually get to the bottom of your triggers by asking you some really deep and explorative questions about your current relationship with food and how that sort of looks like, and then help you figure out what you could be doing instead, right? Because that's ultimately what we want. We want to get super clear and then figure out what we can be doing instead. So this workbook's been really helpful for me. There are a lot of the questions, the deep explorative work that I had to use when I was feeling constantly blocked by these triggers, okay? So it helps you to really get mindful of that in this workbook, and you can grab your copy. I'm just actually going to drop that in the comments on Facebook right now, and then if you are actually watching the Instagram story, so that's where you can grab the workbook there. So I'm going to be sharing that so you guys can grab it, okay? But basically the workbook is really good just to kind of narrow in and get really concrete and clear on what it is that your triggers are, so that way by paying attention to them, you can start to create an alternative and shift through them. And we're actually going to be talking all about triggers in the month of November. So if you want to kind of get in on the conversation of these triggers, you're going to want to join Turn Up the Love Insiders if you're not a part of Turn Up the Love Insiders already, because that's where the conversation is really going to get rolling, and you'll be able to get support from your fellow soul sisters as well, and lean on us if you need anything, and we'll totally hold space for you, and it's just a really cool vibey place that we can start talking about these triggers and working through them. We actually have a day called Trigger Talk Tuesday, and on Trigger Talk Tuesday, that's where we actually get super clear on what it is that might be stopping us. So yeah, if you're wanting to explore these triggers, first you're going to want to grab the workbook, start to get to the bottom of what your triggers might be, and then head on over to Turn Up the Love Insiders and get support from the rest of us so we can talk about them together, because I'm almost 100% sure there's going to be other people who are struggling with this as well, because I mean, we all face triggers. So I'm just going to hop into the comments here now. I see that a couple of you have written in. So Rochelle says that she's struggled with emotional triggers, and sadness really triggers her. I can totally feel you there, Rochelle. I had major emotional triggers, and I did not like feeling sad ever. I would always bottle it down and just try to avoid it. And whenever I'd feel sad, I'd just like bury myself with work, or I would like go out with friends, and just I could never be alone and just feel that sadness and allow it to come up and experience it. So I totally feel you on that one. Megan says it's during stages of uncertainty. Oh, that's an interesting one and a good one. So not knowing what's going to happen next, right? Fear of probably the future, or fear that you didn't make the right decision. So that's a really good one, Megan. Thank you for sharing. And then Emily says emotional. Yeah, so emotional is fairly common, especially for women, right? We're big feelers. Being around negative people, oh, totally. Trying to separate what they are doing with how it's affecting you. And it's hard, right? Because then you're in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it's really hard to just kind of pause and sit back and go, oh, this is a trigger. This isn't actually anything to do with my relationship with them. It's causing me to act in a certain way, probably because of something that happened way back in the past, right? Remember, a trigger is something that is the connection between your conscious mind and a painful buried memory in your past, right? So yeah, emotional triggers and being around certain negative people can totally trigger you and throw you for a left field when you're not even ready for it. So being aware of that is really important. Boredom, Rochelle says, yeah, boredom is a huge one. A lot of people do not like to feel bored. And when they do feel bored, they just eat because they just kind of want that like self-soothing. So that way they're not kind of sitting and allowing their thoughts to race. and maybe like the TV is not entertaining them enough, so they're like, I need something else, right? So boredom is also a really good one. So you guys are self-aware, and you guys are kind of paying attention. Okay, this could be a trigger, but now what I want you to do is to get even more concrete with this. Okay, I want you to go even deeper and get kind of below the surface and really start to dig into like the exact event or more concrete of like who specifically is triggering you, where to cause these emotions to come up. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing that workbook so you guys can grab it, the Uncover Your Triggers workbook. I think it's going to be really helpful for you. It's about, I don't know, 8 questions or so, I think. You can kind of start to explore with that and get super clear on what it is that's going on here, okay? And again, we're going to be talking all about triggers this month, the month of November, especially inside Turn Up the Love Insiders, or you can catch these weekly Turn Up the Love Facebook Live episodes every week on the Turn Up the Love page on Facebook. If you're watching Instagram, I'll be going live on Instagram as well, so hopefully you don't miss it. And if you want to get notifications as to when I'm going to be going live and doing these episodes on triggers, you can be added to my email list and sign up there as well. Okay, so I hope you guys are having a really great day. Thank you so much for joining in on this conversation and for letting me know how you're being affected by your triggers that are stopping you from healing your relationship with food and your body. Don't even worry about it. You can and will get to the bottom of this. By being present, by being aware, and by showing up to do this deep inner work, you're already well on your way. So keep showing up, keep doing you, and I so look forward to hearing more from you guys once you start exploring through the Uncover Your Triggers workbook. All right, chat with you guys soon. Have an amazing rest of your day. Bye, guys.